Liverpool may be back from their trips away in Ibiza and Dubai, but the sunshine vibes have very much continued here in the pre-match press conference for the game against Brighton. Arne Slot was cracking jokes, smiling, looking like he was still a man having a very good time, even though he knew exactly what the questions were going to be. They were going to be about right backs of the past in Trent Alexander-Arnold and right backs of the future in Jeremie Frimpong. And he didn't really give a strong answer to either of those, kept his cards very close to his chest, wants to draw a line under the Trent business, isn't willing to talk about transfers until the players are in the building. But he did let on the fact that he is thinking about transfers quite a lot. There were some interesting comments that he made as well about some of the players who are still in the building who may well be fighting for their futures. We'll be able to hear. Hello again, we are back in the lab to go through the rest of Arne Slot's pre-match press conference. Now, unfortunately, on a day like today, I don't really want to be inside in the lab too much, but I'll make this as brief as possible. There was still plenty that Arne Slot said that I feel like you guys need to know about. So we'll get straight into it. There was no injury news. We don't know yet whether Joe Gomez is fit enough to start or to make any kind of part in the squad because no one asked about it. There's no point talking about contracts because that's all settled. It almost feels like the contract question should be replaced by transfer questions. And he was definitely asked about those, but in true Arne Slot fashion, he did not want to give any kind of sound bites regarding any particular names of players or anything like that, which I can't say I'm too surprised about. But we will talk a little bit about some of the players who are rumoured to be coming to Liverpool in the coming weeks. But we'll get into that in one of the later takeaways. Top takeaway number one, Slot has already made his mind up about every player in this squad. Now, he was asked about whether or not these games represent an opportunity for some of these fringe players to kind of force their way into his plans, the players who are maybe on the cusp of being able to be around next season and some who've got big decisions to be made about them. And Slot kind of batted that away. He said that after 11 to 12 months working with all these players, it will be unfair on them to kind of make any decisions or to change his mind on the basis of 2 games, which ultimately makes a lot of sense, but isn't really good news for those guys on the fringes, to be brutally honest, because as we've seen so often this season, he has really wanted to stick to the same 14, 15, maybe 16 names at a push in terms of who he believes and who he trusts to be part of his team and part of his squad. So if you were one of those fringe players and you're hoping to maybe get 2 to 3 games to be able to impress and maybe use that as a way of fighting your way into the team for next season, prospects don't seem that great. Now, it doesn't feel the same for everybody because, as we've mentioned on previous shows, some of those fringe players do have a role as it stands. I think of Wataru Endo, he definitely has a role, or Harvey Elliott probably has a role as well, you would say. Perhaps even Costa Simicas, although that one is definitely up for debate. But those roles do not involve starting games. They aren't going to be first choice for Liverpool going forward. So I guess there's always still a decision to be made about all of those players, particularly regarding whether or not there are bids that come in for them from other clubs and whether or not these players decide that it's better for their careers so they want to move on. I do feel like in the case of Endo, he probably will be happy to stay, whereas in the case of the other 2, it might be a more difficult question. The Chiesa question came up again, and there are still plenty of you out there who want to hear about Chiesa, want to hear about the situation surrounding Chiesa. And guys, if you're a Chiesa fan, the news was not good, because Slot mentioned, he was asked about the future and about whether or not his playing time could increase next season. And Slot was taught, I think the phrase he used was he would have trouble getting into the team, whether he's at Liverpool or at any other team. He wasn't going to be unequivocal about whether or not Chiesa was going to be a Liverpool player next season. And yes, like I said, he's not going to give definitives on anyone. But the fact that he offered that out there didn't feel like a great move for Chiesa. Didn't feel like a vote of confidence that he's expecting to have Federico Chiesa in his squad next season. Again, I think a lot will depend upon the bids that come in for him, but in his case, I expect to see quite a few bids from Italy. I expect to see quite a few bids that are in and around the amount of money that Liverpool paid for him, and I expect to see the Chiesa experiment ended after one slightly underwhelming, slightly disappointing season. Top takeaway number 2. Frimpong is not a threat to Bradley's long-term future. Now, I mentioned before that he flat batted all the questions regarding transfers, and he didn't speak of anybody by name who isn't already a Liverpool player. We know that there's been lots of talk about Jeremie Frimpong, and yes, he may well be close to being a Liverpool player by all accounts on the reports, but until he officially is, until he's had that picture of him holding the scarf, until he's had his interview with Pete McDowell for LFC TV, Slot is not going to talk about him. And I think that's fair enough. That's probably how I would like most managers to be at all times, really. Just kind of leave that until the point when we're ready to kind of discuss them. But he did talk about his current right-back options, because he was asked the question about Frimpong in relation to whether he would be the right player to replace Trent Alexander-Arnold. And Slot said, well, it's not as if he's got no one around in the club at the moment who could replace Trent Alexander-Arnold. And he rattled through some of his right-back options. Well, I say that. He mentioned Conor Bradley and he mentioned Joe Gomez. Now, previously, when he's spoken about right-back options, he's added Jarrell Quansah and Curtis Jones into that mix as well. This time he didn't. Whether you want to read more into that, I don't know. But for me, it was something that certainly perked up my ears to say, because obviously part of the issue around the fallout from the Trent Alexander-Arnold issue against Arsenal was that Slot felt like Conor couldn't continue. And so in his mind, the option to bring on another right back was Trent Alexander-Arnold. When the reality was that Jarrell Quansah was on the bench, and we've seen him used as a right back this season, he could have done some jiggery pokery and put Curtis Jones there if he decided he didn't want to use Trent. But as we all know, he did. And he's not bothered, by the way. He probably will still use him if he needs to use him for the last 2 games of the season. But we're not going to spend a lot more time talking about that guy. That is not important, I think, really. So why did Slot make such a point of saying that Conor Bradley has the ability to be the right back for the future? Why he has the ability to be the starting right back for Liverpool? Maybe it's because he has perhaps been a little bit unnerved by all this Frimpong talk, because essentially we all heard for the last, however long, that Liverpool wouldn't need to buy a starting right back if Trent left, because we already have one in Conor Bradley. Conor Bradley will feel like he has put a really good account of himself whenever he's pulled on a Liverpool shirt this season, and he would believe that he has the quality and hopefully the belief from the coaching staff that he can go on to be that starting man. But as we all know, the but with Conor is the fact that his injury record is a big part of the problem. He hasn't been able to play as many games week on week on week as you would need to if you're going to be a starting right back. But this is not a situation where a bigger, more important player is going to come in and suddenly the growth or development of a young player is going to be stunted. If Frimpong comes in, this will be a battle for that right back slot. Chris Bascom reported as much in his column in the Telegraph, and if you listen to Arne Slot's words, they will back that up as well. So even if Jeremie Frimpong was to come in, there's no guarantee that he's going to be the de facto starting right back for Liverpool for 45 games. I personally think we're going to be seeing a situation where when Salah isn't playing in the short term and in the long term, the Frimpong will be his replacement. So you can very much see a world in which Bradley and Frimpong become the 2 men on the right-hand side of Liverpool's attack, which I think is quite an exciting prospect. So all you Northern Irishmen out there, all of you big Conor Bradley fans, fear not. Frimpong is not going to be the end of his career. It might actually be the beginning of it. Top takeaway number 3, this is the best time for a break. Now, a lot of people would have seen all the pictures of Arne Slot in Ibiza and the Liverpool players out there in Dubai living their best life, absolutely living it up, enjoying the fruits of their labour, having completed their mission to win the Premier League. And maybe some people will be a little bit surprised, maybe a little bit uneasy with the idea of them blatantly being on the piss while the season's still going on. I know that anybody competing with Brighton for that 8th spot and maybe a European place will probably be grumbling a little bit at the idea of Liverpool potentially taking their eye off the ball. But the reality is that this is just the way that the season shook out. So even if Liverpool hadn't been had still been competing for the title, Slot said that he would have still given them some days off. Maybe not 4 days off, maybe 2 or 3. But considering there was 8 days between the game against Arsenal and this game against Brighton, there was always going to be some time away for these players. The idea that they would train consistently for like 6 or 7 days out of those 8 was never going to be realistic, especially at this point in the season. Well, this is one of those things that we really don't understand as much on the outside, but from within the inside, in terms of sports science, but also in terms of team chemistry. You have to understand when you can give the players a break and when you can't. And as Slot mentioned, these guys they were attacking 4 competitions for a lot of the season. Yes, the FA Cup itself didn't really last that long, but it didn't really afford them that many free midweeks, if you think about it, because there was still the Champions League, there was still the League Cup. So they didn't have that many times where they could go away and have a real break. And the intensity that Liverpool play with and the high stakes of most of Liverpool's football matches when you are competing for trophies suggest that they really need that time off. And the other thing you've got to think about, to put into account, is that by all accounts, this was some way that the squad could say goodbye to Trent Alexander-Arnold. And they probably wouldn't get the chance to do it at any other point. Yes, there's the parade, but the parade is one day, and it's one of those days where, for the players, they get to just really absorb everything that's happening. There's so much going on in terms of seeing all the crowds and you jumping up and down. You're not really kind of making those memories. It's not really the proper place to say goodbye to one of your teammates. And then there's the international games that most players are going to be playing after the season ends. Trent himself may well already be going to the Club World Cup by that point if Real Madrid get their way. So there's so many different things going on at that point in the season. They may not necessarily get the chance to all come together and say goodbye to their brother. And however you all feel about Trent, again, I'm not going into that again in this video. We've all done it to death. It's clear that the players do see him as their brother, and the players do want to celebrate him and want to see him off in a nice way. So having this moment together where they're all away, rather than having this moment in the parade or at the Palace game where there's the potential for some dissent from some fans, I think is very important. So let them have their break. They've definitely earned it. Now it's time for my question to Arne Slot, which was about Curtis Jones, but also about pre-season. Hi Arne, we saw something a little bit different from Curtis Jones against Arsenal. He was dropping a little bit deeper, picking up the ball from the goalkeeper, maybe sitting next to Ryan a little bit further deep in the build-up. You mentioned there you're already thinking about next season. This is the kind of thing that we often see in pre-season, these kind of changes. So do you think that it's allowed you the ability to be able to make those kind of changes? Or you mentioned about motivation as well. Is he the kind of player who maybe you want to give him a different challenge to make sure he is motivated for these last few games?
You mean him, that he played a little bit deeper? Because normally McAllister plays in that position and I think he plays similar.
A lot of the time, Alisson will be giving the ball to Virgil and he'll be building up, but we saw Curtis coming a lot deeper and picking the ball up from the goalkeeper, which we haven't really seen a lot from the midfielders this season.
No, but I think McAllister did this a few times as well, but it all depends also on the way the other team presses. So, and that was the good thing if you play a team like Arsenal, which is sometimes also the difficult thing, but you know what you can expect. And they have the quality and it's perfectly done by them, but you know what to expect. So then sometimes you give a little bit different details to your midfielders, how to do the build-up, and then you might do in other games. So I wouldn't see too much into that. It's just a small detail. I think what we've changed throughout the whole season, the general idea of playing was the same, but we always tried to adapt to the way the other team wanted to press us.
Now, I'm big enough and ugly enough to admit I don't really feel like this question hits in the same way that some of my others have in recent weeks. Essentially, it was probably my third question. Crabbers had kind of stepped on my first one with this question about away games and the record there. So it was kind of more of an idea about how much of what we're seeing from the Slot in these last few games, how much of the tactical little tweaks are with a view to what's happening in the next season. Because essentially, having won the league already, what these last 4 games have afforded him is a chance to start pre-season early and to get something you don't really get from pre-season. Because Obviously, we've seen it in previous years, pre-seasons, a lot of the time, a place where you do try things, you do move players into different positions, you're trying to see who can do what and when. But your opponents are never really, are probably also doing that same kind of experimenting. The intensity is just not there at that stage of your development in terms of your fitness, but in terms of where the team are as well. So this is a rare opportunity to be able to make some changes while you're playing against a team who still see this as a very competitive game. You'll be playing a Brighton side who, as I said previously, they're still going to be fighting for that 8th place in the European spot that comes with it. So they're very much going to be at their best. They absolutely want to end their season with a win against the champions. They've already beat Man City at home. They've already taken points off Arsenal at home. So they want to complete the set of the big teams, quote unquote. So this is going to be a rare opportunity for Arne Slot to try things in as close to a game environment as you can possibly get. However, if you listen to the answer he actually gave, that wasn't really what he was doing. It was more a case of the move that I mentioned regarding Jones was more something for Arsenal rather than something for the future, which, again, I thought was a bit of a fascinating way to look at it because, yes, if you look at the way that Curtis Jones was used in this game, it was actually quite similar to the way he was used in the pre-season game against Arsenal back in Philadelphia. And so it was a way of using Arsenal's high press against them, having more players deep so you can always find a pass in the build-up and then you can get out and around their press and then advance towards their own goal. And Liverpool did that very well. But the notable thing about it for me was the fact that when you had Jones and Gravenberch deep centrally and you had Konate and Van Dijk, the space was for the fullbacks. So you saw quite a few times Robertson had space to run into. You saw Bradley had space to run into. You saw Jones himself a couple of times on that left-hand channel running through space. Now, if you kind of extrapolate this further into the potential fullbacks that Liverpool may have next season, obviously Bradley, maybe Frimpong, maybe Kirkez as well. These are all players who really thrive on having space to run into. So perhaps, in my mind, we were thinking, maybe this is something we are going to see more of next season. Maybe we're going to be evolving the way that we build up the play in order to free those fullbacks and allow them to become an attacking weapon again. But Slot said, no, that wasn't my intention. It was just horses for courses up against Arsenal. Now, that may be true, and it probably is. But it also may not be true. And we may end up seeing Liverpool do more of that in pre-season, in this game against Brighton, and next season. So keep an eye out for that. That's all I will say. And that's pretty much all I have to say on this matter in general. Thank you, as ever, for listening. I want to give a few admin shout-outs, as I normally do at the end. Obviously, I've been on the Late Challenge once again. You can go and find that on YouTube. You can go and find us out there on Patreon. I've been on the Anfield Rap as well. Some of you may have heard me on the Anfield Rap this week singing my new Ryan Gravenberch song. Yeah, lots of people have had opinions on this song. I'm actually quite made up that it's been so popular. If you are going down to Brighton and you feel like singing it, be my guest. Honestly, be my guest. I feel like it's one of those situations as well that these things will evolve over time, so people may end up shortening certain bits, changing certain bits. I haven't got any problem with that. That's the evolution of these songs. Once they're out into the public domain, people do what the hell they like with them. So if you feel that way inclined, you can do that too. I'm not precious about it. But I will also be back once again doing more work for This Is Anfield at certain points in the future. I'll be back doing some stuff for LSC TV in and around the parade on Monday. I will be playing at the Bus Night on Sunday night, on the Trophy Lift Day at the Olympia. It's already sold out, so if you haven't got a ticket, unlucky. If you have got a ticket, boy, you guys better watch out because it's going to be one hell of a night. But before all that, Liverpool got a very fascinating game on Monday night against Brighton, which hopefully will end in a victory. See you then.